Hi everyone, my name is Megan McManus. I'm with MSU Center for Regional Food Systems. We are bringing to you a farm to school track today that's actually based off of a national training curriculum that was developed by USDA, Food Nutrition Service, NCAT, and then the National Farm to School Network. And it's originally a multi-day, really intensive track that we've condensed down into a few short sessions. You're going to learn a lot today. We are doing this with our friends from Michigan Department of Education. We have Wendy Crowley and Cheyenne Liberty. And then we have some MSU Extension educators like Kelly McClellan. And then Garrett and Mariel will be here later. So we have a lot to cover today. The goal of this training is to help producers build capacity to launch or expand your efforts to sell to schools. We believe that diversifying your business can also help with bringing farm to school activity in schools across the state as well. So we're going to learn a lot of stuff today. First thing is gaining an understanding of what farm to school is and how it can benefit your business. We're going to identify why you should be selling to schools and then how that can align with your farm or food business goals. You're going to learn about how to sell to schools today in this hour as well. And then later in the second session, we're going to talk more about planning and growing for school sales. And then at the end of today, we're going to hear from a local farmer. We're going to have Devon Wilson from Sunlight Gardens, and he's going to talk about his experience with selling to schools. And then we're going to also talk about all the different resources that are available to you. We have a lot of resources out there. There's a lot of programs that are available to you. You're not alone in this, so we're going to share all of that information. So there's a lot of different elements with farm to school. It can vary from school to school, district to district. We have an educational component, so that's the curriculum aspect where you can be learning about farm to school activities in the classroom, like health, agriculture, nutrition, all of that stuff. You can have field trips to farms or food businesses. Then there's the school garden side, so that's the hands-on learning component where kids can learn at school gardens or school farms. You might have a farmer come into the school and teach about their farm. But today we're going to be focused on the procurement side. So this is the food purchasing component where local foods are purchased by the school from a farm or a food supplier. And then that's promoted and served in the cafeteria, either through meals or activities like taste tests or classroom activities like snacks and stuff like that. So school districts are really interested in purchasing local foods for their school meals for a lot of different reasons. We know that they want to purchase from local farmers and support their local economy. We see that with 10 cents a meal, which Wendy's going to talk about in a little bit, but food service directors are wanting to purchase and support their communities. We know that it improves school meal quality and program participation. When kids are willing to try new foods, they come home to their families and talk about those products and encourage their families to purchase local foods. And we also know that schools want to support their school wellness policies and school board priorities as well. And there's a lot of benefits to you for farm to school. Some data from the National Farm to School Network says that there's an average of 5% increase in income from farm to school sales. And that can, of course, lead to long stream revenue for producers. We also see an increase in market diversification and economic growth opportunities for farmers. So there's the financial benefit to you as well as the community component. And then really quickly, I did want to go over some data that we have that talks about the increase in interest of local food purchasing by schools. So at MSU, we've been tracking this data for many years now. We get some really cool information from the Michigan Department of Ed folks. All schools that want to participate in a child nutrition program have to complete a survey every year, and that survey has optional questions about local food purchasing. And we started tracking this survey data back in 2014, and back then only about 50% of schools said they were purchasing local foods, whereas now we've seen the steady increase, and in the last survey, 2022 to 23, we've seen almost 80% of all schools say that they're purchasing some form of local foods. The different channels vary. They're still buying a lot of that primarily through their broadline distributor, but we do see schools that are purchasing from other sources like farmers markets, cooperatives, direct from farmers as well. So it's really exciting. We've been seeing a lot of interest from schools. And then this will make more sense in just a few slides when Wendy talks about the 10 cents a meal program, but there are schools who are participating in a farm to school program, and we see a huge difference in the level of purchasing of local foods with those schools versus other schools. And so it's particularly interesting and advantageous to you guys to keep that in mind when you're wanting to sell to schools if they're a 10 cents a meal grantee. You can see in some of the channels like at Farm Direct, we have almost double amount of schools purchasing direct from farms if they participate in the 10 cents a meal program versus other schools. So something important to keep in mind. So that's just a really brief overview from me. I'm going to pass it off now to Wendy Crowley, and she's going to talk about this amazing program called 10 cents a meal.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Wendy Crowley. I am a farm to program consultant with the Michigan Department of Education, and my primary job is to administer this really innovative Michigan grant called 10 cents a meal for Michigan's kids and farms. I also support a lot of our other federal farm to program work, so connecting farm to child care centers, to food banks, to those kinds of things that that happen throughout our department, and then also working with all of our partners across the state. But 10 cents a meal, the state of Michigan is one of the very few states in the nation who provides direct funding to incentivize child nutrition program operators with extra dollars when they put Michigan produce on kids' plates. So anybody who participates in a federal child nutrition program, so a child care center, a community service agency, a YMCA, a church, as well as schools, are all eligible for 10 cents a meal. And Michigan uses state school aid dollars to pay extra money back for purchasing Michigan produce.
Did you say, so it's all schools? It wouldn't be like senior care centers or for adults?
Not for adults. So the legislation specifically specifies children nutritions. So there are agencies that feed kids and seniors, but they're supposed to use these grant dollars just for the meals that they serve to kids.
Thank you.
My slides aren't here. I can talk without them.
Okay.
So I don't have my slides, but I'm going to talk without them.
I'll try to find where they are.
So 10 cents a meal for Michigan's kids and farms, the calculation is for any child nutrition participating sponsor, 10 cents times every meal you served last year in a child nutrition program. So if you serve kids in the summertime, sometimes you see those signs in the park, meet up and eat up. Those programs all count. So if you're a YMCA or a Boys and Girls Club that feeds kids in the summer, that qualifies. School districts do that as well. National School Lunch and Breakfast Program, child care centers that participate in the Child and Adult Care Food Program. A lot of those have at-risk after-school programs, which are intended to keep kids off the streets in the afternoon. So maybe it's homework help or after-school gym at the YMCA. All of those people are eligible for this program. And so 10 cents times every meal you served in your school last year in Detroit Public Schools is $800,000, right? Like it's a really big amount of money. For a child care center, it might be $600 or $700, but that still is a lot of money in a child care center budget. And so we award those grants through the state legislated funding, and it's a matching grant. So if you get a $1,000 grant, you need to spend $2,000 on Michigan local produce in order to get your $1,000 back from us. But if you spend $100 on Michigan produce, we'll give you $50. So there's no risk to our sponsors to not try, right? So you don't have to spend it all. We have had more and more and more participation over the years, and so we expect next year we might not be able to award everybody their full amount because it's becoming more and more competitive. We have lots of sponsors who are spending more and more of their dollars, and it's really great to see what we see on their invoices. So we see, things that I didn't know existed. We learned what corn shoots were the other day because kids are eating corn shoots, right? Do you know what that is? It's like the grass part of an ear of corn that they eat like a salad or, steamed. Interesting, just really interesting things. So without my slides, I'm going to hand this out instead. This is, the short version of how it works for a supplier. So once an entity gets the grant, sure, that would be great. Once an entity gets the grant, they fill out a grant application, we approve it, and then they collect invoice data. They are required to have the name of the farm and the location, the county of the farm, and the product that they served. They upload that to us, and we process payments every 2 months and pay them back for those. So Detroit Public Schools would submit, thousands of dollars worth of invoice data. Kalamazoo Public Schools buys a lot from Valley Hub. They also buy direct, I know, from several farmers in the area here. But that's the case across the state. There are some really great networks in the UP that are collecting local farmers. And like Megan said, all of the broadline distributors sell some amount of local produce as well. So school districts buy local produce. They could be growing that produce in their school garden. They could be buying it at the farmer's market. They could be buying it just for a taste testing or just for an apple crunch. They could be buying apples just for an apple event at their school, and all of those purchases count towards this grant.
I'm sorry, I have
Please. We're winging it here, please.
So, because we interviewed our farmers, and they insist that there's all these barriers to getting there. And then we also, I did a grant with Niles, and they also interviewed their kitchen staff, and they see the same things, like especially like Chartwell's, they have such high limits of insurance that their vendors have to meet, like really high levels of insurance for liability, and so it doesn't seem as easy as just the food service person going and picking it up. Is it though? I mean, maybe people think that there's barriers and they're not.
Yes and no. So Chartwell's is a food service management company, and Cheyenne's going to talk about how schools are organized. But if I'm a school district that chooses to contract the management of my food service out to Chartwell's, they're one of the biggest and best ones in the state. They're national, but we love our partnership with them. They can make extra rules because lawyers run the world, and they can make extra rules about liability insurance. But a school district in and of itself can choose what level of food safety they want to require, what level of insurance they want to require. So an independent school district, a school district we call self-op, that operates their own food service program, their school board or their administration makes those choices. There are some federal procurement rules. If you're buying, $500,000 worth of produce a year, then you have to do some bidding and some contracting, and our office can help you with that. But for many school districts or entities that are getting started, there's a threshold underneath which you don't have to do any or very, very little procurement documentation as far as making sure that you're being fair in awarding your bid, right? So if I'm a school district that's just looking for, like Diane said, that was our director that was talking about just every Friday is local food day, I'm not buying enough local food. And my grant program is specific to produce, but we also want you to buy local meat and local eggs and local milk and all of those things for your local food day. To get started, it's a lot easier. So I think a lot of people assume that I have to go find 10 farmers and I have to find farmers that can sell me enough broccoli to feed all of my kids all year long, and that's not true. It's almost impossible to buy broccoli in Michigan in February, right? Unless it's frozen. But why wouldn't you be buying it in September and October? Or if you're feeding kids in the summertime, why wouldn't you be buying it in the summertime? We see it as a continuum, as a let's start, right? And then we'll get there. There's some really big federal money coming that's going to support the infrastructure of people that are trying to do that freezing and packing and preparing and things. And so that's going to make it a lot easier for your school food service directors that are telling you there's a lot of barriers, because they're right. There are schools in Michigan that don't have kitchens. There are schools in Michigan that don't have the staff or the equipment to wash and chop and dice and package a bushel of carrots that shows up at their door, right? They actually really do need to buy already peeled, already washed, already sliced produce. But there are schools that do have that staff and do have that capacity. So we're trying to meet everybody where they are. A Chartwell school will be a little more difficult, but they have a new nutrition director who's been trying really hard to be more flexible about some of those smaller purchases. So my card is here at a break. I'd love to talk to you about how we can work on that. Yeah. But schools can do, basically, the answer is there's a wide range of schools and how they can choose to do that. Some school districts require only GAP certified farms, right? That's a barrier for a lot of small farms. Most school districts don't. The Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development has a program where they can help small farms do sort of like a pre-safety inspection. And so if we can have a food service director come to visit you and they know what things to look for, how often do you wash your packages, are you restraining livestock, those kinds of things, then a food service director can and often does just make the decision that this is an appropriate purchase. I got a little sidetracked, sorry.
And there's more info to come about food safety in the next session of the day.
Sorry, I was getting ahead of myself. That's why I have to have slides, so that it keeps me only in my zone. So
Wendy, I did not find your slides, I'm sorry.
that's okay, I'll just talk. Okay. So what I was going to talk about is what is minimally processed. So 10 cents a meal requires schools to buy Michigan-grown, minimally processed fruits, vegetables, and dry beans. So that means it can be washed, it can be chopped, it can be packaged, it can be frozen, it can be dried, but it can't be cooked. So applesauce doesn't count. If I'm going to buy apples and make applesauce at school, that's great. That fulfills an education component. It teaches kids about all those things, but I need to have apples. If I'm buying, I can buy packages of sliced apples. I can buy dry beans. I can buy dried cherries. I can buy frozen squash. So all of those things count, and we're working hard to find those steps in the middle of the supply chain that can do that drying and that washing and that packaging and that freezing. Some farms are able to do some of those steps themselves. Some schools are able to do those steps themselves, but there's a big gap. So that's where we're trying to get. And when a farm contracts with a food hub or with a co-op or even with some of our bigger broadline distributors, as long as the name of the farm gets passed along to their customer, to the school district or the child care center or the YMCA, then it counts for our grant. And we, send state dollars back to schools who do that. So that gives them the incentive to try. It gives them the incentive to pay a little extra for local food, right? It gives them the incentive to develop a relationship with a local farmer, all those things. I don't know if I had anything else I was going to say about 10 cents a meal. Michigan's one of the only states that does it, and we're very, very lucky to have this. The priority of supporting local farms and teaching kids about where their food comes from and giving child nutrition entities the extra dollars that they need to either to be willing to try or to cover the cost of that. There's a lot of big hydroponic greens growers in the state that are able to supply lettuce and salad greens to schools. Almost, there are very few places in the state that don't have access to Michigan-grown greens year-round, which is really cool to see. But of course, it's not feasible to grow cucumbers and tomatoes and peppers year-round most places, at least not at that volume. But this flyer and my business card is here. My name is Wendy. We're happy to talk to you more about how to connect with farms. Are you next? Or Cheyenne?
Next, yes. Got it. All right, if your slides are not right for some reason.
Hi everyone, my name's Cheyenne. I also work for the Department of Education, and my role as a farm to program consultant is to help connect farmers like you all and other food suppliers with our child nutrition program operators, including 10 cents a meal grantees. And so I'm going to share a little bit more about what types of requirements and other considerations our food service directors have to consider before they decide what to purchase from you or from a broadline distributor or from whatever food supplier they're working with. And the purpose of this presentation is to, first of all, share a little bit more about what's the size of the market in schools here, what's the opportunity, and then to share a little bit more about those requirements, including where the requirements come from that determine what gets onto a child's plate at the school lunch or school breakfast, what components a food service director has to consider when building their menu and determining what goes onto that plate, what kind of funding they're working with, so how much a school meal costs, what's that bottom line of what they're working with, the The impact of Michigan School Meals, which is a new program funded by the state legislature this year. If you haven't already heard about it, I'll just give you an overview, all that you need to know, not all that I would need to know, because that's a lot. And then some of the basics about school food procurement procedures that Wendy already mentioned a bit. So to start, what's the size and what does the school meals market look like in Michigan? So in 2022, child nutrition programs across the state served over 1.4 million children. And through those meals, schools and other food providers received $567 million for those meals. So that's a lot of money going towards, it might be going towards California tomatoes in the wintertime, but we'd like to see as much of that money as possible go toward Michigan produce. We have, like Wendy mentioned, I think Megan mentioned that, but we have 79% of schools participating in Farm to School in 2022, and that means that there are 608 school districts serving local foods. So they're all over the state, they're all different sizes, and they have all different needs. Like Wendy mentioned, different school districts have different food service models, and this determines how much fresh food processing they can actually do on site, what types of products they're looking for, whether it's products that are pre-processed, frozen, ready to put on a plate, or food that might be coming, it's just washed, it's a whole produce. And it's important to understand the context of your customer to determine what kind of products are the best fit for them. So we could be working with a self-operated school district where the kitchen staff are employed by the school, or we could be working with a food service management company. And basically that's a contract company like Chartwell's, if you've heard of Chartwell's, that is contracted by the school district. They work in the school buildings, but they're employed by a different company. And then within those two models, we could have on-site food preparation or a central kitchen. In on-site food preparation, each school building has its own kitchen. Food is cooked and prepared in the building. In a central kitchen model, there's one kitchen that serves the whole school district. And so every day, either fully prepared meals or meal components that are halfway prepared are sent from the central kitchen to the school building where they're served to kids. And then the last school food service model is vended meals. And this is when the school district contracts with a company that prepares meals completely separately from the school building usually, and they're sent to the school district already prepared in a unitized meal, which is in that picture all the way on the right. You can see all those meals are just already prepared, just waiting to be warmed up. And so this is often where we find the most difficulty with incorporating local foods, because the school themselves has the least control over what goes into that meal. And there's a lot more communication that has to happen between the vended meals company and the school district to ensure that that vended meals company is actually documenting what is going into that meal and ensuring that it's local. And then the other consideration is what they're actually working with in their kitchen. So the picture on the left is actually at a school building in Detroit Public Schools Community District. It's a huge kitchen. They have all the equipment you could think of. They have a big freezer where they freeze Michigan produce to be used during the winter time. So this is like top of the line, best case scenario, where they have the kitchen equipment and staffing that they need to work with whole fresh produce and process it into a form that's usable for school meals. On the other hand, we have a lot of school districts that just don't have the space, or it wasn't in the plan when the building was built to have a full kitchen. And so they're a lot more limited in the amount of like whole fresh produce that they can work with, and they have to go more for options that are pre-prepared. Maybe they can do a little bit of cooking in their kitchen, but they don't have a lot of room to work with. So it's important to understand the spectrum of what school districts might have the capacity to do with the food that they're getting. Okay, so next, I'm going to talk a little bit about the actual programs that schools participate in order to serve meals to children. And these programs provide all the requirements that food service directors have to meet in order to get their funding, basically. And so we have 3 programs that we consider to be school meal programs, and those are the National School Lunch Program, the School Breakfast Program, and the Fresh Fruit and Vegetable Program. Lunch and breakfast are pretty self-explanatory, and then the Fresh Fruit and Vegetable Program is, it's basically a snack program. It's available only in elementary schools to schools in high-need areas, and it provides funding for schools to provide a fresh fruit or vegetable snack. Cannot be cooked, cannot be frozen, it has to be fresh to kids. And there is not a local requirement in this program, but we absolutely encourage school districts that participate in this program to use local produce as much as they can. Additional child nutrition programs that are available to schools are the Child and Adult Care Food Program and the Summer Food Service Program. The CACFP program is often used for snacks and suppers after school. And then the Summer Food Service Program is a good one to know about because a lot of the meals that schools serve are not during the peak harvest season, but a lot of schools do participate in the Summer Food Service Program, which does occur over the summer and is a great opportunity to get that fresh Michigan produce into schools. So it's a good idea to, if you're thinking about selling to school, find out if they participate in the Summer Food Service Program, because that's the best opportunity to sell a lot of fresh produce during those months of the year. So where do these requirements come from? Just briefly, all of the child nutrition programs I mentioned are regulated and created by the USDA. And then the state agency, which is Michigan Department of Education, is responsible for implementing those requirements within the state, providing guidance to providers on the ground that are in the state, and providing oversight and making sure that they're following the rules. And then the school district is the one that actually prepares the meals and serves them and works with the state agency to make sure that they're following the rules and that they get the funding that they need for their meals. So what influences school meal purchasing, and what from those programs is actually determining what goes on the plate? And the answer to that is the meal pattern, which is basically the rules for what must be in a school meal for it to count as a school meal, and the meal cost, so how much money are they getting back for each meal that they serve. So we're going to take a quick look at the different components that go into each type of meal. There are 5 meal components. Those are milk, grain, protein, fruit, and vegetable. And the protein can be a meat or it can be an alternative like beans or tofu or eggs. So in the National School Lunch Program, schools are required to include all 5 components in each meal. In the School Breakfast Program, they only have to include 3 components, so they have to have milk, they have to have a fruit or vegetable, and they have to have a grain or a protein. And then in the Fresh Fruit and Vegetable Program, again, the only component in that program would be a fruit or a vegetable. And local food can fit in any part of this. As Wendy mentioned, the 10 cents a meal program specifically incentivizes schools to purchase fruits, vegetables, and beans. So that can cover the fruit, vegetable, and protein components. But we also absolutely support schools to buy other types of protein and grains and milk locally. We just don't have any designated grant funding to support those purchases. So when meeting the meal component requirements, food program managers have to comply with a few additional rules about each component to ensure that kids get a variety of nutrients from their food. And these requirements present both a challenge and an opportunity. So for milk, they have to provide fat-free and low-fat options. Whole milk is not allowed for school-level children. For grains, the items that they serve must be whole grain rich. For fruit, they're not allowed to serve juice for every meal. They can serve it sometimes, but not all the time. They have to only serve it during a certain number of times per week. And then for vegetables, they actually have to serve a number of vegetables from each subgroup every week. And so they're going to have dark green vegetables, red orange vegetables, beans and peas, starchy vegetables, and other vegetables on that plate every week in their menu so that children get a variety of nutrients. And like I said, this is a challenge for food service directors because, every menu is a puzzle piece. Like, okay, if I put my dark green vegetable on Wednesday, when do I have my red orange vegetable? And all of that. So there's a lot that goes into how a menu is planned, and sometimes that reduces their flexibility with being able to swap. Like, you can't swap kale for carrots on one day because then you won't have your dark green vegetable for the week. But the other hand is that food service directors are looking for a wide variety of types of vegetables to serve to kids, and that's where we'd love to see them start thinking about, okay, what's seasonal during this month? How can I make sure that we're prioritizing local and using the dark green vegetable that's in season? Okay, so the next thing we want to talk about is the cost of school meals. So the average cost to produce a school lunch is only $3.99, and that sounds pretty low, but we are producing these meals at scale, so those funds can go a long way, and our food service directors are experienced in making sure that they get the most out of their school lunches. So typically a school meal cost would be spent 45% on food, 45% on labor, and then 10% on other costs like supplies and contract services. So that comes down to $1.80 spent on food for each lunch. And if you multiply that by 28.9 million meals served per day, that's about $52 million per day spent on food in Michigan on school meals. So what would it look like? Oops, I just skipped ahead. What would it look like if we spent all of that on local? Okay. So next I wanted to talk about the Michigan School Meals Program, which I briefly mentioned earlier. It's a state-funded universal free meals program that was introduced for the first time during this school year. And so this is a program that's funded by the state legislature, and it basically makes sure that every child in Michigan can eat lunch for free in school. And so the USDA provides funding based on a child's income eligibility. So there are lots of children in Michigan that are already eligible for free meals, but basically the funding from the state bridges that gap and makes sure that all the other kids that don't qualify based on federal standards can qualify for a free meal in Michigan because the legislature has provided extra funding for those meals. So how does Michigan School Meals work with Farm to School? Sometimes we hear from people that now that all meals are free, why do we need extra funding to support Farm to School? Because, you know, the schools are already getting extra money, right? That's not really true. And we're really grateful that we have a supportive legislature that is funding both 10 cents a meal and Michigan School Meals because they don't overlap and they're very complementary to each other. So Michigan School Meals provides better meal access by ensuring that families don't have to pay for their children to eat breakfast and lunch. On the other hand, Farm to Program provides better meal quality by ensuring that the most delicious, locally grown fruits, veggies, and beans are served to kids. Pairing the two programs together ensures that we use food service dollars for the greatest benefit. So we have access and we have quality together. So what's the impact of Michigan School Meals that we've seen so far? So absolutely there is an increase in participation. With free meals for all, schools are serving more meals to kids. And that means that there's less food insecurity among those kids in their communities. And that's amazing. Like Wendy mentioned, 10 cents a meal grant funds are calculated based on the number of total meals that schools serve. And so because Michigan School Meals is leading schools to serve more meals, they're now going to be eligible for higher 10 cents a meal grant awards, which is exciting because now they can have the opportunity to buy more local. The one downside of this program is that, you know, schools are serving more meals, they have pretty much the same staff capacity, and so those kitchens are feeling a lot more strain, and it's going to be more important than ever for them to have those shortcut products like pre-cut carrot sticks or frozen washed blueberries that are much easier to use in meals than a fresh raw product. Okay. Now in the last section of my little part here, I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the procurement requirements that schools have to follow when buying food for the school meals. So you definitely don't need to know all the details about what informal and formal procurement means, but the gist of it is that when schools spend a smaller amount of money, there's less rules about how they have to procure that food. So if a school spends less than $10,000, it's pretty easy for them to just choose whatever vendor they want to buy that food from. And that's called a micro purchase. If they spend between $10,000 and $250,000, then they've crossed the small purchase threshold, and now they have to get 3 quotes before they select a vendor that they're going to purchase food from. It's still relatively easy. They don't have to go through a formal bid process, but they do have to collect quotes from 3 different vendors.
Can I ask you a quick
Yep.
question about that then? So if they have to collect 3 quotes, and I don't know, our school districts, like if they're dealing with that $250,000 or not, but then the locally, like the food hub, like Valley Hub, might not be competitive, say, against the Gordon Foods or the Cisco's. So do they have to go then with the cheaper one? Like they have to go with the one that's sourced nationally as opposed to?
That's a great question. And it really depends on how they word their bid, their request for quotes on a specific product. And the procurement process provides them with tools in order to get what they're really looking for. Because, if you're looking for local carrots, you're probably not going to want to contract with Cisco, because you'll get local carrots sometimes, but you won't be able to guarantee that they're local, and you won't be able to get them throughout the whole year. And so I'll skip forward to my next slide really quick. There's an option in the procurement process called geographic preference. And basically, it does not allow schools to specify that they're looking for a local product, because according to the USDA, that would be limiting competition. And the purpose of this procurement process is to ensure open and fair competition. However, it does give the school the option to provide other specifications, such as if they specify like a particular variety that is only grown in Michigan, if they specify like a certain amount of time since harvest, that can be included in the bid, or a specific stage of ripeness. So they can specifically say in their procurement that they want tomatoes that were harvested at peak ripeness. And if a distributor is going to be shipping tomatoes from California, none of those tomatoes are going to be picked at peak ripeness, because they would be rotten by the time they got to Michigan. And so those are different options that schools have in order to ensure that they're getting the product that they want, especially if that product is local. And those are the options that schools use when they're working with a vendor like Valley Hub or a local farm. And this is not for you to figure out, this is for the schools to figure out. So it's good for you to know that they have to go through these requirements when they're buying food, but you don't need to worry about knowing all the requirements back to front, because that's the school district's responsibility. Okay, I think that pretty much covers what I had to say about what it's like to be a school in trying to participate in Farm to School. But like I said, my job is to help connect suppliers like you with our Child Nutrition Program customers. My cards are on the table, and I would be happy to work with you if you're looking to either expand your work with schools or to start working with schools. We have a great opportunity with the 10 Cents a Meal program, and a lot of schools in Michigan are eager to work with farmers like you. So that's my contact information on the screen, and I'll pass it over to Kelly.
Thanks, Cheyenne.
Thank you.
And I definitely want to reiterate, Cheyenne and Wendy are your partners in figuring out the best way to get the food that you're growing or the food that people in your area are growing to the schools that are really motivated and interested in purchasing what you have. So let me find my slides. And then we'll talk about our final piece in this session, which is some information that farmers should know about selling to school markets. So like Megan said at the very beginning of this session, this is a multi-day or full-day training that we're condensing down into these 3 sessions today. So there may be some information in this section that overlaps some things that Megan or Wendy or Cheyenne have said. So I will definitely mention those, but might scoot past them a little more quickly to give us some time for questions before we're done at 10:05. We're going to talk about market channels for selling to schools. So how can you get what you're growing into a school? As Megan said, there's many different ways that schools are using. Broadline distributors are probably the most common, food hubs, direct to the school, and a few other options that we'll dig into. In this section, we'll talk a little bit about communicating with school buyers and figuring out who the person at a school district is, who you should be talking to. A little more info than what Cheyenne just shared about understanding the purchasing methods, and then talking a little bit about vendor requirements. So first of all, there's kind of 2 primary models for how your food that you're growing can get into a school, and that's basically you as the farmer selling direct to the school or working with some sort of intermediary, which could be a distributor, a food hub, something like that. So just reiterating some of the data that Megan shared in the very beginning, we have almost 80% of Michigan school districts are purchasing local Michigan grown products, which is fantastic. And 86% of those purchases are coming through some sort of distributor. 16% of school districts are purchasing from local farms directly, so that's certainly not an insignificant amount of school districts, and it's an option for you, certainly. So this is just another diagram that kind of breaks up those intermediated market channels in the blue to kind of more local or regional distributors, and in the green to the national wholesale distributors. But then that pink section, direct to school, is you as the farmer selling direct to schools. So as you're thinking about your farm and your business and your market mix, really understanding that any one of these options could be a way for you to get the produce that you're growing into schools. So we're going to dig in a little bit more into each of these. So first, these intermediated market channels could be something like a local retail outlet. So you may not think of a grocery store or a food retail store as somewhere where school food service directors may be getting their food, but definitely in more rural areas, maybe smaller school districts, or even some of our early care and education, either centers or home-based sites, grocery stores, and even farmers markets are places where people are purchasing food for school food service. Food hubs and other regional aggregators, we'll dig into food hubs in a minute. Value-added processors are also purchasing local produce and then selling to schools. And then independent regional or local distributors such as LaGrasso Brothers, which is highlighted on this slide. So let's talk about food hubs for a second, which I am a big fan of food hubs. I absolutely love them. Anyone in here familiar with a food hub or currently selling to a food hub? No. Awesome. All right. So what a food hub is at its very core is an entity, whether a for-profit, nonprofit, or backed by some other institution, that sources food from local farmers, aggregates it all, and sells it to consumers, institutions, schools, restaurants, kind of every customer. So the benefit of a food hub to the customers is that they don't have to work with 6 different farmers to get all of the products that they need. And the benefit to farmers is that you don't have to work with 6 different schools or 6 different restaurants to get them what they need from what you're growing. We have about a dozen food hubs in Michigan, kind of all different scales and models of what they do. Some really are just that connection platform of, farmers list their products, purchasers look at that list and choose what they want that week or throughout the season. And then the food hub is kind of collaborating on the logistics. There are some food hubs that focus more on processing, doing some sort of food box programs, and doing some of that kind of value-added freezing processing that, as we mentioned, is really helpful at getting Michigan-grown produce still in schools during the winter season. We do have a Michigan Food Hub network that has some information about food hubs across the state. Some ones that come to mind, this photo is Flint Fresh, which is near where I'm from. KVCC has Valley Hub, which is one of the other kind of cutting edge food hubs here in Michigan. I know there's West Michigan Farm Link, the UP Food Exchange, a few Eastern Market, a few others that I'm not thinking of right now.
Traverse City, My Farm.
Oh, My Farm, yep. So just really quickly on wholesale distribution channels, these are maybe who schools are most used to sourcing their food from. So the larger wholesale distribution channels are these broadline distributors, food service management companies, and even some like USDA specific programs that schools would probably be really familiar with, like USDA Foods and DoD Fresh. So probably not something that small farms are going to interface with them enough, but just knowing that this is probably what school food service directors will be familiar with. And then finally, direct to school. So this is what most people think of when they hear farm to school. They picture this beautiful green field of kale and these kids who are excitedly eating it in their school cafeteria. And this is a relationship directly between a local producer and the school. And there's lots of joy and excitement around farm to school, and we'll dig into kind of the pluses and the minuses when you're thinking about potentially having this direct relationship with a school. So some of the potential benefits, I think first comes to mind is your locally grown product is in local schools feeding local kids. And there's the high level of customer satisfaction, the shortened supply chain, kind of like Cheyenne was mentioning with those tomatoes picked at peak ripeness. You know that what you're serving or what you are providing to these schools is exactly ripe the way it should be, not sitting on a truck from California for a week. When you have that direct relationship with a school, you also have the opportunity to, retain your brand and your business, so it can really help with your individual marketing plan. There's a potential that schools could be a market for lower grade products, especially if they have processing capabilities and can take, the ugly carrots or things like that. And also, this is jumping back to the food hub idea, might be an option for food hubs who are doing processing as well. You have that direct line of communication with the school, and like Cheyenne mentioned, if a school has introduced some of those specific things into their bidding process, you may have some sort of increased competitive edge in bidding because you are local, you can provide things at peak freshness. And then you're, really being a part of that local decision-making process on what food is served to local kids. And as exciting and wonderful as that all is, there are some drawbacks or some things that you should consider if you're thinking about jumping into schools as a market channel for your food. Definitely there's going to be some increased time spent marketing your products. Determining a fair price can be complex and kind of different from other channels where you may be selling your food. You will have to meet some sort of food safety standards, and as Wendy mentioned, that kind of varies district by district or food service company by food service company, so it's just kind of a lot to keep track of. As you probably are thinking from all of the different meal pattern requirements and food requirements that Cheyenne went through, school food service directors have so much on their plate that they're trying to figure out, and so there may be some of that complexity that you have to figure out how you fit into as a farmer. As well as working with a school as a customer, there may be some additional documentation, record keeping, payment processes that may take longer or be more cumbersome than other processes you're used to, and then some sort of vendor establishment process. So, once you've considered all of those things, and if you think that a direct-to-school relationship is right for you and your farm, you've got to figure out who to talk to. So school buyers have a few different names that you may see. School food authority, school nutrition director, school food service manager, procurement manager. I tend to use school food service director, kind of just all of these different names. So once you find who this person is in your local school district or a school district that you want to work with, meeting with them to really understand their specific needs and their program goals and product needs. You know, now that you have this knowledge of, you know, they may be a self-operated school food service program, they may be working through a contract with a contract company, you know, kind of knowing those things and having that conversation up front kind of helps you understand their program better. As well as understanding, you know, is farm to school or is sourcing local food new to them, or is it something that they've been doing for years and years and years, can kind of help with that conversation. Really important to know, if you know one school food service program, you know one school food service program. Every school is different, every district is different, and so it's really about having those curious conversations and building relationships if you do want to enter into that direct purchasing relationship with them. It's important to be patient. Again, there's a lot that's going on. I feel like the worst thing you could do going into a meeting with a school food service director is starting by talking about how horrible school food is and how, you know, you've heard all these horror stories and parents aren't happy and students aren't happy. That's going to shut the conversation down. I think it's important to come in with some understanding and curiosity about how they do what they do in that district, why they do what they do, and what they and how what your goals and your farm's goals are may align with that. We have a handout, which Wendy, can I have you pass this out? If you do decide to meet with a school nutrition director, this handout is a good checklist to think about before you have this meeting and also to kind of guide conversation. And it really talks about, you know, what are their goals, what is their experience, what how do they make decisions about the food that's purchased? Again, we have, you know, just in Michigan, school districts that range from, you know, thousands and thousands of students to a few hundred, kind of all across the board. So motivations and scale are going to be different across the state. Yeah, please do.
We also know that more than half of the school food service directors in Michigan are new in the last 3 years. We lost lots and lots of experienced food service directors during the pandemic. So, like Kelly's mentioning, they're still figuring out how to deal with meal pattern requirements. Many are short-staffed. Now we're serving hundreds of times more kids because Michigan school meals, right? They have a lot going on right now.
Yes, yes. Yeah, I know I was in a meeting of food service directors in the Flint area, and some of the districts were just talking about, you know, they're just trying to figure out how to serve enough meals for the demand now that there is the school meals.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
They don't have freezers, they don't have coolers, how to get enough food into the building to feed all these kids right now.
Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. There is a lot going on right now, yes. And that's where if you have or if you work with a partner who has any sort of processing capability, that's a really like needed value add right now in school, that's in food that's going to schools. So I'm going to zip through my last few slides so we can get to questions with our last 7 minutes. So as I mentioned before, there may be some direct to school channels that aren't, you know, kind of having that more formalized purchase process, such as your farmer's market or farm stand that you may already be doing. Like I said, some smaller, especially rural schools where they're sourcing some food, and maybe even for taste tests or for other activities that can kind of be your foot in the door for selling to these schools. Community supported agriculture, CSA, is also an option to partner with schools on, and then there's the formal contracts and purchase orders. I'm going to really zip through this because this was included in Cheyenne's presentation, but don't forget that there are these different thresholds, and the micro purchase option or the small purchase option are probably where you're going to start as a small farm before you get to that really formal solicitation process that, you know, is formal bids and all of that. If you get to a school formal bid process, you know, make sure you're reading the entire proposal, what they're looking for, and make sure that what you're offering actually meets those requirements. The school will be communicating their product specifications, thanks Cheyenne, through that solicitation, and there are some examples of those. If you want to reach out to our team, we can kind of help share more info about that. So some questions to consider after absorbing all this information over the last hour. Do you have time to market your products to schools on your own? Do you have time to invest in developing and maintaining relationships with schools? Do you have the capacity to meet the school's product needs, at either a small scale or a large scale, and then do the volumes you sell align with the volumes they need? So we'll dig into some of these things in our next session of the day. But I wanted to make sure we have time for questions for our whole team. So any questions?
So has anyone sold to schools before, or has it tried to? No.
What do you grow?
Yeah.
What kind of producers are you?
We're just starting, so right now we have some hay
Okay.
and some goats.
Fantastic.
Awesome. Anybody else? We talk a lot about produce, but we like to talk to dairy farmers and egg farmers and all the other things too.
Would schools actually buy like local meat?
Yes,
They do. They would.
yes, absolutely.
I mean, most of it's higher priced because it's a lot of it grass-fed.
It is. Schools have a lot of money right now, though. There's been a lot of supply chain dollars and extra COVID money still. This is probably the last year that we'll see that. But we've seen a lot of relationship building, buying Michigan meat just for a Michigan meal or something like that. It has to be processed at a USDA certified facility, and there aren't a lot of those in Michigan, so that's a barrier for both farmers and for schools. But often we're able to see those micro purchases. Just like last week, I talked to a school that's buying pattied Michigan beef burgers from a local farmer that are processed at a thing, and they're just going to serve them on Fridays for the rest of the school year or something, just to try. But they're doing taste testing too, and that's the cool part. So having kids taste the difference between this local product, or having the farmer come talk, or sometimes a field trip, those kinds of things. Yes, absolutely. And we try always to remind schools, you don't have to buy all of the meat that you need for the year. Let's buy enough that you need for one day or 1 week or something, and try, right? Yeah.
Is there a figure on if schools are paying for conventional grown produce and meat versus organic or primarily grass-fed pastured?
They often believe that they can't afford that, especially because we don't have incentive dollars for protein or meat. We have these incentive dollars that would allow them to pay more for produce, right? Because we have this 10 cents a meal program, and so if the barrier is cost and we can, give you back a half match to that organic produce, we have that, but we don't have a match or an incentive. But a school district can choose to spend their dollars any way they want. So if there's a school district, the school district that you're the farmer and your children go to this school district, maybe the wellness committee or the community as a whole values that and they want to intentionally spend their dollars that way, they absolutely can. All schools are required to have a local wellness policy. And as a part of that local wellness policy, they have to have a variety of stakeholders and community members, and farmers are on the suggested list to be part of that wellness policy. So if you have a community that is a farming community and a community that has many beef farmers or chicken farmers or whatever that is in your community, it might be important to your school district to buy local meat, and then you just have to write your bids and we have people in our office that specifically do that, but you just have to write your bid to say, I want to buy beef that's, within a day of butchering, or I don't know how that works, but, they can specify that they want it.
Sure.
I will add too, so I'm on the 10 cents a meal team with them, and Cheyenne has data on, so if you're interested in numbers and purchasing data, she can provide you with 10 cents a meal grantee data and look at the percent breakdown of local foods they're purchasing. So then if you're interested in a certain school district, you're not sure what types of products they're purchasing, you can ask for that information and she can give you a full breakdown, and so that way it can give you a gauge on the level of interest that a school might purchase your product. So that's a really cool thing to offer.
We don't have that breakdown data for non-produce.
True.
Because we don't, but we also had a federal grant last year called Local Food for Schools that did allow purchasing of dairy, grain, eggs, meat, and so we do have some data. It was easiest for schools to claim milk for that because almost all milk in Michigan is local. Are any of you dairy farmers?
Used to be, yeah.
So, I mean, there's a lot of, almost all Michigan milk almost all milk available in Michigan comes from Michigan. So many of the schools that utilize that grant only spent it on milk purchases, but we have some really cool data on some other local protein sources, and that's available too.
Yeah, if you want any specific data from us, I have a sign-up sheet here at the front of the room, and you can just leave your email address, the county you're in, and then I'll either send you information for schools in that county, or I can send you other resources like a list of grantees across the state, or the handout that most of you got about how the 10 cents a meal program works. So please sign up or contact me from my business card if you would like more information.
And we have a really cool map. I don't know if you guys have
Yeah.
seen this already. Okay, yeah. It
Can
has
you bring
food
it
service
up?
director contact information in it, so you can just scroll down and it has like their email address and their name. So if you want to reach out to school,
That would be amazing.
Yes. All right, we will definitely stick around for more questions, more conversation, but it is 10:05, so if you want to head to the break that's next, I want to make sure you're able to do that. We would appreciate if you're able to scan this QR code or type this link in to give us a little bit of feedback about this session and what you learned. We will be back in here at 10:40 for our next presentation, which is all about choosing products to sell to schools and planning and growing for schools. So that'll be myself and my colleague Mariel Borgman. So thank you so much for joining us bright and early, first thing in the day. And yeah, we'll definitely stick around for more questions or conversation. Thanks, everyone.